All right, my name and where I call home. So you have to start with the difficult questions, of course. I'm Tres Hofmeister, and we are here in Boulder, Colorado, where I live. But when I hear that question, I always think about Saltame Sensei being asked once here in Boulder, actually, downtown. It was after a seminar, and we were walking around, and he enjoys shopping and taking in the sights. So he also is a smoker, so he stopped outside of the coffee shop, I think, to smoke a cigarette, and he was approached by a classic Boulder figure who was coming down the sidewalk like this, laid his eyes on Saltame Sensei with his black Stetson and his long duster on, and approached him and had a cigarette in his hand and said, "Do you have a light?" And Saltame Sensei looked over at him and gave him the up and down like this once, said nothing, but took out his lighter and held it up and lit a cigarette for him. And they both sat back and took a draw, and I was wondering what would happen next, of course. And the guy looks at Sensei and goes up and down like this once and says, "Where are you from?" And Sensei looks back at him and says, "I'm from universe." So anytime I hear this question, especially in Aikido context these days, I think about that question and how Saltame Sensei received it. Because, of course, it's a very interesting perspective from the broad perspective of practice. Like I say, you're not starting off with the easy questions. Oh, why did I start practicing Aikido? This feels like a familiar story at this point, but I guess I'll start with it. When I was a boy, I was exposed to the television program Kung Fu as a kid in the 70s. And the idea that you could have a life that involved that kind of study really just fascinated me. And it was, of course, being a teenage boy or in my early teens maybe, really it was exciting to see the martial aspect of it. But it was more than that, really. The idea that there was a place you could go to look at the world from a broader lens, it struck me. And Aikido, I found subsequently looking through another 60s and 70s resource called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was this beautiful big thing. Stuart Brand, he's still around, was involved with that back then. And I saw in there a little write-up of Aikido and the not Aikido and the Harmony of Nature, Saltame Sensei's book. I saw a write-up of Aikido and the Dynamic Sphere, the wonderful book by Adele Westbrook and Oscar Roddy. The illustrations are fantastic. So the illustrations caught me. I thought, look at this, it's so beautiful. And there was a little description saying something about the person is thrown effortlessly without any use of force by the person who's protecting himself, something to that effect. And I thought, wow, that is for me. I'm a scrawny kid. I'm not confident about my interactions with others. And look at this. This sounds like the one. Unfortunately, I discovered it doesn't really work that way, but that was maybe how I got started. Why Aikido? Well, I didn't find Aikido originally, actually. I found an Aiki Jiu-Jitsu school where Judo was also taught only for children at that time, and Shotokan Karate. So I had some of my feet in all of three of those practices during those first few years, and that was before I came to Colorado. So in fact, I did change dojos specifically, and I met Ikeda Sensei when I came here to Boulder with my family who had returned to Colorado, and as I was a teenager at that time, and discovered him when I saw a copy of one of Adele Westbrook's fantastic, or maybe it's Oscar Roddy, my apologies, the drawings from that book, which were used everywhere. There was one on a little piece of paper on one of the kiosks down in the mall in downtown Boulder, and it had Ikeda Sensei's number on it, and I called that number, and he answered the phone. And that was how we met, the first time at least.
So is Ikeda Sensei what kept you coming back?
Ikeda Sensei certainly was a significant part of the reason I kept coming back. I felt like I had found what I had hoped to find when I came to Boulder and met Ikeda Sensei and found the Boulder Aikikai, which was quite small at that time. But nonetheless, there were people around. There was a lot going on. The intensity of the practice was something I really appreciated. Oh, well, I was just going to say that one of the things that I appreciate in Ikeda Sensei from the very beginning was his sincerity and the way that that appeared in his practice. He was also pretty rough at that time. He was a young man, and reasonably young man. I think he was about 30, I was 19. So certainly that kind of personal quality appeals to me a lot. I saw a definition of it recently in another context that describes sincerity as when your words really match your feeling. And I thought, oh, you know, that I see that in the Aikido world a lot. It's not sincere like good or moral or something like that. Though, of course, those are things that interest me and are important to me. But the kind of way that your inner life or your inner conviction or yourself appears in your practice or in your relationships with others is the kind of thing that I'm thinking of when I say sincerity. Maybe that's makoto in Japanese, though I am not Japanese. I have that secondhand. At any rate, yeah, that certainly is something that is important to me and my fellow practitioners. What have I learned about myself throughout my practice?
Yeah, over the years, what kind of growth do you see in yourself?
Well, I guess having just been speaking about sincerity in that way, that has seemed like a gradual and ongoing process of refinement or development. It's an interesting question, and that development isn't maybe the word that I would want to use, but that kind of increasing the harmony between my inner life and my social life, my dojo life, my interactions with others, that's certainly a value that I have. And I feel that that's something that has really, there's a lot of opportunity for that in practice, in Aikido practice in particular. So, yeah, I mean, that's where I would start with that, I'd say. I can see the nervousness.
Well, I'm just... Yeah, I'm thinking. Because I kind of want you to expand a little bit about, like, your state of mind when you first started. Like, was it... What was the drive... Like, let's go back to Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, right?
Yep.
What was your driving force there? I mean, I know that you said that you saw Kung Fu, right, which is a great show.
Yeah.
I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
David Carey is like awesome. But like, how has the desire to learn martial arts evolved for you? What has kind of...
Well, first, it's great to have an exchange like this, because for me, that's what happens in these settings. When we talk together about practice or we talk together about our personal experience, something can be brought forward in a certain way that's better than a kind of abstract set of questions and answers. Because, of course, how I respond for me really feels like it's particular to a given day and who I'm speaking with and what the situation is and what I was doing earlier. And what I've been doing in the last year or many years. And for me, that's one of the things that interests me about Aikido. Aikido has for me, has a view like that, it's not about particular things as much as the way maybe particular things relate or interrelate. And of course, it's about particular things. It's not an either or in that respect. So I think my interests when I first began to practice were naive, in the sense that everyone is naive before they're experienced. I had ideas about, wow, there's seeing David Carradine in these TV shows and just projecting, wow, there's this sort of level of understanding or ability that's outside the norm, and being outside the norm is the answer, to my insecurities, to my questions about ability, to my desires to feel safe around others, etc. And it turns out it's really not like that. Learning to be comfortable with others, learning to be okay, not regardless of circumstance, but comfortable in a wider range of circumstances. That's the kind of thing that I feel like opened up for me in Aikido practice. I mean, one of the things. Given what we're talking about today, I certainly think about that. And Aikido is unique in that regard, or it's particular. It has a particular set of things. It has the social aspect, and it has the practice aspect. It has a martial aspect. It has an aspect of I'm reluctant to say spiritual exactly, but I'm sure if I don't think about it too much, I might say a spiritual or an aspect that's related to understanding the world more simply as it is, and giving up one's naive illusions over time. And Aikido presents its own challenges in that regard. We don't practice a competitive form where you run into a certain kind of testing of your understanding. But it also has strengths in that that's a constantly present question. What stands out when I think of a question like that is that my life practicing Aikido in the community of Aikido practitioners who I see frequently or not frequently, and teachers that I'm close to, or especially, of course, or teachers that I've met only occasionally. It's filled with impressions and memories and moments, and it's something that I value and appreciate. It's one of the pleasures of a life of practice that you get to have those. We get to have those experiences regularly, where someone says something or moves in a particular way, and you stop, and your attention is caught. Something moves you in a particular way. I certainly have that experience with Tres Hofmeister Sensei's lectures in particular, of course watching him over the years, and Ikeda Sensei as well, of course. And I guess if I were to try to maybe think of it's still a somewhat general example, but there are moments in practice when I think perhaps a teacher's addressing a group, and for an instant I feel that I'm being addressed personally, and that the comments or the suggestions for practice are directed to my specific immediate circumstance. And I know other people, excuse me, I know that other people in the room are having likely a similar experience. At any rate, that other people are also having that experience, that I'm in a room filled with people while I'm having this very personal experience, it's something that I associate with practice, actually, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I always found the complexity of interaction on the mat is one of the more rewarding parts of practice, as opposed to just learning how to. I mean, kata is really important. Technique is really important. Those are all aspects that are important. But learning how other people move is class, feeling how your body connects with somebody else's body, how your mind changes as you practice is really, really valuable. And then the conversations off the mat become more intimate and dynamic as a result of the practice on the mat. That's the things that kind of sparked, those thoughts kind of were sparked by what you said.
Well, boy, we should put you in the chair for a second, and I'll come over there.
Engaging in that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's just it, right? That we're drawn into exchange, where we can meet and things happen. I think it's sometimes explicit, and it's certainly implicit in Aikido as a practice. So that you are moved by something that I say, or that I am moved by something you say, that's it's part and parcel for me. Well, in a setting like this, especially when we're looking at wrapping things up, I always have to think first of Hiroshi Ikeda Sensei, my teacher here in Boulder, who I have known continuously since I first met him when I was 19 years old. And it's more than 40 years now, and he's a continuous and meaningful for me presence in my life. And so thank you, Sensei. And I certainly feel gratitude for that. It's unusual, I think, actually, to have a circumstance like I have with him. And then, of course, my thanks to Saltome Sensei, who is a sort of person that you rarely meet in life. And which is, I guess that's a little redundant, that you rarely meet. One rarely meets. And I just am so grateful for that. For the opportunities that I've had with him and with Ikeda Sensei, of course. I literally would not be who I am today without these two people. So, and of course, all the other people who I've practiced with over time, in some respects, maybe at various turns, they're more responsible for, well, responsible is not the right word, but have been a stronger influence on me than teachers at various turns. And sometimes those were small turns. Sometimes those were small turns that became big turns. And I guess maybe to follow that thought, to be attentive to those small turns and how you're influenced by others and how you influence others. I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to do that in the context of Aikido training and the other interests that I have.